Hiya 5, on to chapter 10, Splat. We always go in separately, Lloyd said in a mysterious voice, just in case anyone's watching. You go first, H. I'll bring Dinah in a moment. Harvey nodded and slipped away down an alley between the houses opposite. Lloyd prodded Dinah. Go on, keep staring in the shop window as if you're interested. In baths and basins, Dinah said lightly. Who'd believe that? Go on, Lloyd, tell me what's happening. Wait and see. Lloyd looked even more mysterious. You'll find out soon enough. He went on examining a purple soap dish with every appearance of enthusiasm for a couple of more minutes. Then he glanced at his watch and looked up and down the road. OK, I think it's all right now. Come on. He led the way with elaborate casualness down the alley. At the bottom was a gate into a garden. He pushed it open and they were facing a little wooden shed. He rapped on the door. The man who can keep order can rule the world, said a voice from inside. Beside him, Lloyd felt Dinah start with surprise, and he grinned. But the man who can bear disorder is truly free, he answered. The wooden door opened. Pass, friend. He slid through, motioning Dinah to follow him. She bent her head sideways to avoid the garden tools hanging round the opening and walked in to find herself confronting 4 pairs of eyes. Ian, Mandy and Ingrid looked frankly hostile. Only Harvey gave her an encouraging smile. Have a box. He pushed one towards her, and she sat down like the others, squashed uncomfortably close in the confined space. The shed was dark and dusty, and the box creaked perilously underneath her. Ian looked at her, raising one elegant fair eyebrow. Well, well, Lloyd, he murmured. Who have you brought with you, then? I hope you have a good excuse. He'd better have, said Ingrid hotly. He's broken all the rules and put us all in danger. Mandy smiled gently. Suppose we hear what he's got to say. Lloyd doesn't usually do things without a good reason. Lloyd nodded. I'm glad Mandy said that. I didn't really want to bring Dinah, but I think she's got some important information to give you. But she's one of them, Ingrid said crossly. One of the headmaster's goody-goodies. Why should we believe anything she says? You will when you've heard it, Harvey broke in. Oh, go on, Di, tell them. Wait a minute. Dinah had sat quietly, listening to them arguing. Now she sat up straighter. You want to know that I won't get you into trouble? That's fair enough, but how do I know that you won't get me into trouble? What is all this, and why do you meet here in secret? Ingrid bridled again, but Ian said, It's a fair enough question. Why don't you explain, Mr. Chairman? Now she's seen this much, it can't do any more harm. All right, Lloyd said, if no one minds. He turned to Dinah. This is the Society for the Protection of Our Lives Against Them. Splat, for short, Harvey put in. Us against the headmaster and the teachers and all the goody-goodies, Ingrid said with relish. She frowned. And we're us, and you're one of them, so I can't think what you're doing here. But what do you do? Dinah said. Ian grinned. Ah, the crucial question. Well, we all keep an eye out for the prefects so we can warn each other, and we swap details of all the new rules the headmaster invents so that we don't get caught out. And Mandy helps us with our sums and things, Ingrid added. Mandy blushed. It's not just that, though. Mostly it's to keep our spirits up so we don't feel we're all alone in that horrible school with no one to help us. I see, Dinah nodded. Well, I think you'll feel better when you've heard what I want to say. You see, wait a moment. Ian put up his hand. I think you should take the oath first, Mr. Chairman. Yes, of course, Lloyd said shortly, annoyed that he had not thought of it himself. Dinah Glass, do you swear to honour the secrecy of Splat, to protect its members, and never willingly to reveal anything about any of us to any of them? I do, Dinah said solemnly. Right, said Lloyd. Now, tell them. It's about assembly, Dinah began. You see, she leant forwards eagerly and began to explain, answering their questions clearly and briefly. Lloyd watched her. He supposed she could be trusted, but somehow he'd not expected the others to believe her so quickly. If he had had to put in a good word for her, to plead for her to be heard, he would have felt more friendly towards her. But the others seemed to be on her side straight away. Rather crossly he studied them. Ian was looking at her with cool approval, and Mandy was grinning her shy, pleasant grin. Even Ingrid had been convinced. She was still raging, but now her rage was directed all at the headmaster. She bounced up and down on her box and banged her fist into the palm of her hand. He's evil, wicked. Do you mean all of the other victims? Really? It's him that makes them behave like that? Oh, that's fiendish. It's... Calm down, Ingrid. Ian patted her annoyingly on the back. Think how pleased the headmaster would be if you choked to death. She'd stopped abruptly, and everyone laughed. Lloyd decided it was time he took charge of the meeting again. After all, he was the chairman. But before he could say anything, Harvey burst out, "But you haven't heard the most important part yet, what Dinah thinks." "She has important thoughts, does she?" Ian said teasingly. Mandy gave a reproachful look. "Of course she does. You heard Harvey say how clever she was. Come on, Di, what was it?" "Well, I'm worried about what's going to happen next." Earnestly, Dinah began to explain her fears about the headmaster's plans. Lloyd chewed irritably at the end of his finger. He'd meant to do this bit himself, get them all organised the way he usually did, but it was no use interrupting yet. He waited until Dinah had finished and then tapped smartly on the floor to call the meeting to order. "Right now, you've all heard what Dinah has to say. There's no evidence for it, of course, but it makes sense. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Mandy looked thoughtful. "We really need a way of finding out what actually happens in assembly, apart from the hypnotism, I mean. If the headmaster's going to use the children for anything, that'll be where he tells them all about it." "Can't you stay awake somehow, Di?" Ingrid said. Dinah sighed. "I told you I've tried that, but he can tell." She looked at them one by one. "But he can't hypnotise any of you. Couldn't one of you sneak into the hall and hide?" Ian shook his head. "Not a chance. We always have a prefect watching us. They treat us as if we're criminals. I don't suppose they'll even let us go to the toilet, not now they know what Harvey did. Anyway," Harvey said quickly, "there's nowhere to hide in the hall. You know what it's like." Dinah nodded silently, and there was a long pause. Lloyd was straining to think of a good idea. He'd taught the others to mouth so that they could talk in secret when no one was looking, and he was the one who had started the register of rules and persuaded the others to copy bits out of encyclopedias so that they could keep up with the goody-goodies at school. But now his mind felt like a piece of soggy cotton wool. "It's a pity we can't bug the hall," he said at last in a flippant voice. "Lloyd, that's it!" Dinah bounced on her seat, looking unusually excited for her. Her cheeks were very faintly pink. "We can't bug the hall very easily, but we could bug me. Oh, if only I had a phone." "My mum's got an old one," Mandy said. "She'll never notice if I borrow it." Dinah grinned. "Well then, it's easy. I'll put it in my blazer pocket and turn it to video. When I go into the hall, I won't get any pictures, but it'll probably pick up enough sound to tell us." She launched into a long discussion with Ian about the best way to do it. Mandy put in a suggestion from time to time, and Harvey and Ingrid were nodding away in agreement. Lloyd watched them all, totally disgusted. He might have known how it would be. He'd told Harvey that there would never be any peace and quiet again if a girl came to live with them, and he'd been right. For all she looked so meek and docile, there had been nothing but trouble ever since she walked into that house. And now she'd walked into her first splat meeting, where she had no business to be anyway, and taken it over. No one would guess that he was the chairman, or that bugging the hall had been his idea. He sat hunched over on his box, sulking. Suddenly Ingrid prodded him. "Hey, wake up, Lloyd, we're making a decision." She turned to Dinah. "It's one of our rules. Everything we do has to be agreed by all of us, otherwise we don't go in. We don't do it. There are so few of us that we can't afford to argue." Grumpily, Lloyd looked round at them. "Right, let's take a vote. The proposal is that Dinah should try to record what happens in assembly." Ian, Harvey, Mandy, Ingrid, all four of them nodded. "And Dinah," Harvey said. "You've forgotten her. She's a sworn-in member too." "Dinah," Lloyd said reluctantly. Dinah nodded slowly, watching Lloyd's face. "What about you?" she murmured. "You haven't said anything yet." "I'm not sure I do agree," Lloyd said. "It's a very dangerous plan, and we've always tried to keep out of danger. That's what this society's for, not for solving mysteries. What happens if something goes wrong?" "I'm the only one who'll be in danger then," Dinah said mildly. "If I'm not afraid, why should you be? I won't tell on the rest of you. I swore, remember?" "But how do we know you'll keep your promise?" "Oh, Elle," Harvey said impatiently. Lloyd could see the others growing annoyed with him as well. He would have to give in. All right, he said with bad grace. "We'll try it tomorrow, and we'll all meet at our house afterwards to hear whether you've managed to get anything. But I bet it won't work." Ingrid glared at him, and he banged on the floor again before she could say anything. "Meeting dissolved." He stamped home at high speed, trying to leave Dinah behind, but Harvey chose to walk with her and chat instead of catching up, and that did not improve Lloyd's temper one little bit.